Some people face a setback and immediately start planning their next move. Others face the same setback and go completely still. Not from laziness, not from weakness. The difference is not in the obstacle, it is in what the brain has already been taught about whether effort changes anything. Learned helplessness is not a character flaw. Hoyle, Dobbs and Miles. It is a lesson. 1. The nervous system learned under conditions where struggling genuinely made no difference. There is a version of giving up that looks like a choice. And then there is the version that does not feel like anything at all, where the motivation was not withdrawn, but quietly erased. People who have been through prolonged stress, abuse, or chronic failure often describe it the same way. Not anger, not despair exactly, but a flat certainty that it would not matter anyway. That feeling has a name. It has a mechanism. And neither of them are about weakness. What makes this pattern so hard to recognize from the outside and so hard to feel from the inside is that it looks identical to apathy. But apathy is indifference. This is something more precise. The brain has run the calculation and returned a specific answer. Effort and outcome are not connected. Once that answer is encoded, it becomes the lens for everything that follows. This matters because we tend to meet stillness with pressure. We tell people to try harder, want it more, stop making excuses. And if the stillness came from a choice, that might help. But if it came from learning, from a nervous system that was taught, under conditions of real powerlessness, that trying changed nothing, then pressure does not reach it. You cannot motivate someone out of a conclusion, their brain encoded as a survival lesson. In 1967, psychologist Martin Seligman and his colleague Seligman Maier ran a series of experiments that neither man had entirely anticipated. Dogs were placed in a harness and exposed to mild electric shocks they could not avoid or control. Later, those same dogs were moved into a different enclosure, a shuttle box with a low barrier they could easily jump to escape further shocks. Most of them did not jump. They lay down. They had learned in that first harness that nothing they did changed what happened to them, and that learning transferred into a completely different situation. Seligman and Maier published these findings in 1967, and the phrase they landed on was learned helplessness, a state produced not by pain itself, but by uncontrollable pain. The loss of perceived control, not the suffering, was the active ingredient. What surprises me most about this finding is how quickly it happened. It did not take years of repeated failure. A relatively brief exposure to inescapable adversity was enough to alter behavior in a lasting way. The brain is efficient. If action has never changed an outcome, the brain stops filing action as an option. Seligman later extended this to humans. In his 1975 book, Helplessness, on depression, development and death, he observed that people exposed to prolonged uncontrollable stress, abusive relationships, chronic illness, institutional poverty show the same pattern. They stop initiating. They underestimate their own performance. They feel the outcome is decided before they begin. The mechanism is not moral failure. It is learning that worked perfectly in one environment and generalized too far into another. For decades, the assumption was that learned helplessness was purely psychological, a learned expectation. Then Seligman Maier, revisiting his own original research nearly 50 years later, found something more specific happening at the neural level. The mechanism sat in a region called the dorsal raphe nucleus, which governs serotonin signaling. Uncontrollable stress activated this region in ways that controllable stress did not. The brain was not just learning passivity. It was being shifted into a biological state that suppressed active coping. Passivity, in this model, is not a default that control overrides. Control is the thing that has to be learned. The nervous system's baseline, under uncontrollable threat, is shut down. Agency has to be built, experience by experience, against that pull. Bessel van der Kolk, writing in The Body Keeps the Score in 2014, made a related observation about trauma survivors. He described how stress response systems, repeatedly activated without resolution, begin to rewire the thresholds for threat detection. People do not just remember their helplessness, they carry it physiologically. The nervous system stays in a posture of bracing, which looks from the outside like passivity, but is from the inside a kind of exhausted vigilance. Daniel Kahneman's framework in thinking, fast and slow, adds another layer to this. When the fast associative system has encoded a pattern deeply enough, rational override becomes costly and often fails. The person knows, consciously, that this situation is different from the one that hurt them. But the fast system is already answering. It will not matter. Insight does not erase the encoding. It just sits alongside it, waiting. The same research that documented helplessness also documented that it could be unlearned. Seligman observed that when dogs were physically guided through the escape response, gently moved across the barrier again and again, they gradually began to initiate the movement themselves. The body had to be shown, repeatedly, that action and outcome were connected. Knowing it intellectually was not enough. The update had to happen at the level where the original learning occurred. This is why insight alone rarely dissolves the pattern. Small, self-initiated actions where the outcome is genuinely contingent on what you do. That is the corrective data the nervous system needs. Quote, not grand gestures. Not overcoming enormous obstacles in a single move. Something closer to, you did something small, and something changed because of it. That is the signal the brain has been waiting for. Seligman's later work explored what he called explanatory style, the internal story people tell about why bad things happen. People prone to learned helplessness tend to explain setbacks as permanent, pervasive, and personal. Chandring, forever, because of who I am. The shift is not forced optimism. It is a slow, honest narrowing of scope, this setback in this area right now. Not a verdict on the whole self. If any of this feels familiar, that flat certainty, that sense that the outcome is already written, it is worth holding on to this. The feeling is a record of what was true in a previous environment. It is not a forecast. The brain updated once under conditions of real powerlessness. It can update again under conditions of real agency. That process is slower than a realization, but it is not closed. If these ideas about how the mind learns its own limits feel worth sitting with, there is more here. Subscribe, and we will keep building a clearer map of how your mind actually works.